Hello again. Hi! We decided to go live again because Tyler got a new job.
Yay!
And he starts next week, and so I thought kind of these midday chats would be difficult to do once he's working a regular shift. So
Plus, Joey wants to be famous.
yeah, apparently. I think you can kind of see him in the screen. So on our chat on volume 3 last week, I got a really great question from someone asking about how we navigate conflict, and I gave a text response to that, which was very high level, but I thought it could be a great topic of conversation for today. So conflict can mean a lot of things, ranging anywhere from a slight minor disagreement about something all the way up to a knockdown, drag out, screaming match, of which I've experienced both. Not with Tyler though, and I think there's something to be said about the work that we've done on ourselves as individuals, because yes, Tyler and I have disagreed on things. I'm sure we could think of some funny examples of things that we disagree on. Mostly tastes and culture and some food stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
Things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But we haven't had, like, we've never raised our voices at each other. Each of us has raised our voices in moments of feeling frustration and stuff, but it hasn't been directed at each other. So if we're frustrated at something that happened during the day or whatever. And for me, that's been a big part of it, because that used to be a big trigger for me. Anytime someone raised their voice in the room that I was in, whether it was directed at me or not, I would get very uncomfortable, because I had learned that raised voices meant it was an unsafe place for me to be. So to learn to hold space for someone that might be going through something challenging and just letting them vent and do their thing without taking that on myself or thinking it means anything about myself, I think has been a big part of it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think part of the work that I have done personally, and I imagine this is true for you as well, is understanding and even being able to ask in the situation of people venting, like, what would you like from me right now? Would you like some words of advice? Do you want me just to listen? You want me to call you out for the bullshit that you're spelling sometimes, And for me, I mean, it's, as the person who would be venting, of course it's my job to ask for what I need, right? Which often for me is just I just need somebody to listen so that all of the craziness and the disgusting stuff that's going on inside my head can come out of me so that it can be done. Because the way that I usually work is, once I've said it out loud, it loses so much power.
Yeah.
And that's usually all I need. But the times that I do need more than that, of how do you think I should respond, or how do you, what do you think I should say, or what are your thoughts? Those are questions that I generally ask. But God, there are so many relationships in the past of mine where I, like a lot of people, thought that my significant other or people that I was closest to should be able to read my mind about things, right?
Yeah.
If you loved me, you would just know what I need,
Yeah.
right? And that was a source of a lot of conflict for a long time for me in various relationships, because that's just what I thought. I was such a people pleaser. Gross. I heard a person one time say, you're not people pleasing, you are approval sucking, and that's exactly what I was doing. Tell me I'm good and okay. And
No judgment though.
Yeah, no judgment. Just for myself. That's about me.
Yeah.
But You know, like I thought, like that is how I thought about things. Like I'm going to do everything that I possibly can that's in my power to make you as happy as possible.
Yeah.
You know, which now I know is not my responsibility, but it's also not somebody else's responsibility to do those things for me either.
Right.
And that took me a long time to unlearn. You know, I had to unlearn what I thought loving was before I could relearn how to have healthy boundaries for myself, and just it kind of all had to change for me. But you know, like now I don't expect people to read my mind.
Yeah.
Well, not always. There are still times where I'm like, you should just know this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But
Can you give an example?
No, because some of those people might be watching this video eventually. So I don't think I can talk about those in a general enough way to share that. But
Well, what I think you might be getting at is there are certain things that we know fundamentally just from like knowing what a healthy relationship looks like,
Right.
and what is expected in those sorts of settings, and so where challenges that you might be referencing and that I have experienced myself, it's like it's so frustrating when people don't embody those characteristics, and that's something that they should know, and they don't.
Well, I think what I was getting at more is, I mean, yes, to what you said, but also, like, I can give you a specific example because this is mostly about me being gross more than anybody else, but, because I don't want to call somebody out, you know, but each year for my birthday, and in my family with my upbringing, birthdays are a very big deal. There's always something that happens for my birthday. Always some sort of an outing or a get together of some kind. And I think this was 3 years ago. People were asking me what I was doing, and I was like, I'm not sure yet, because I didn't want to plan my own birthday party. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And nobody was asking me like, hey, I would like to do something for you. What do you want to do? You know, it was just, what are we doing for your birthday? And it is my responsibility to say to someone, hey, would you either help me plan something, or would you plan something for me? Because I don't want to plan my own party and do all the work for my own party and host my own party. Unless I actually want to, you know. So 2 years ago, I did exactly that. I was like, I'm going to ask for help, but I want to plan this thing, and it's going to be simple and whatever. But I was waiting for people to say, hey, Tyler, I want to do this for you, as opposed to asking those people around me, you know, to do something. And I was getting all kinds of offended and upset, and it's like, nobody loves me, and blah, blah, blah. And this is only 3 years ago, right? So, again, I'm a human being just like everybody else, you know? So, I try to stay on the straight and narrow path, but it doesn't, I veer off every once in a while. I can get back on track. So that's something that I mean about people reading my mind, or just knowing what I need, however.
Right. And if that hasn't been, like, if we haven't been clear, like, the root of all of that and how you avoid all of that is with strong communication. So I think that's a big, not the sole part, but it's a big part of why Tyler and I have not had conflict, is because we're such good communicators, and we're very open about how we feel, both about the little things like, you know, who's emptied the dishwasher, as well as the bigger stuff, about, you know, what we want from each other and from ourselves and all that. So, you know, it's probably a huge cliche to say that, like, communication is key to a healthy relationship, but I don't know that everybody fully understands that, because of situations where, like what you were describing, where, you know, if there's someone, I had a degree of this as well, of like, I'm anticipating all of your needs, so in return I expect you to anticipate my needs without communicating them out loud. And part of that, I think, is learning to ask for what you want, which can be really uncomfortable for people. Sometimes it's easier to say, to set a boundary, or say, no, I don't want that, or can we fix that, than to ask, like, this is what I really would like to experience with you, or can you do this for me? Can you help me with this? Like, asking for help can be really challenging. And learning to do that, there's a lot of vulnerability and freedom waiting for you on the other side of communicating what you desire and what you want from another person or from the relationship.
Yeah, and I think what's important too is the personal work that precedes all of that, obviously, and we could talk about that for weeks and 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 weeks. And if you would like to do that, hire Ted. But like I know a moment that sticks out for me is I have a lot of I don't know the right word for this, because hang-ups is the wrong word because it has a negative connotation, but I still have some I don't know the right word to use, but I still have some stuff around sex from time to time, and my own body image issues, which are substantially less than what they have been in the past. Thank you, work I've done. But like there have been times when I've asked Ted, like, do you want to have sex? And he has told me no, and I don't feel any kind of way about that, you know? And I remember the very first time I was going to ask, I was very uncomfortable, very, very, very uncomfortable, because I've never had to ask for that before. And it was the first time I was like, well, this is a thing, and there were one of two things are going to happen. I'm either going to feel completely rejected and like shame spiral, worst case scenario thinker here, right? Or it's going to be fine. So I asked, you said no, and I was fine.
Yeah. Because
there was no attachment to the outcome of that for me, right? So like if you said yes, great. If you said no, great. So
you also knew that no meant nothing about you.
Oh, absolutely.
Or that I was feeling like some sort of way about our relationship,
yeah.
or that something was wrong. Like
right.
None of that.
Right, which is all of the pre-work on myself, right? And that's what happens so much in situations that arise for lots of people is, you know, things like, oh, well, I read this in a text message, and so you cannot hear tone of voice in a text message, and if you already, I shouldn't say always, but if you already have trepidation about a situation on the outcome of that situation, and depending on what your mindset is whenever you ask something or engage in a conversation with somebody, if you have any negativity in that, you're going to read that in a negative way.
Yeah.
It is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right, of that. And that's just like one of a bajillion examples. You know, like I will not engage in negative conversations via text message. I will not do it for that exact reason.
Yeah.
It's just, there's too many things that could be misconstrued that way. And if you're fighting via text, you need Jesus. It's not a great option for hardly anybody usually. I mean, I don't know all of your lives, but for me, I'll speak for myself. Like that's not a thing that should happen ever.
Yeah. The other piece about that I wanted to highlight is the more work you do on yourself, the less you take things personally. So in the asking for sex example, like me saying no had nothing to do with how I perceive his physical body or our relationship or anything like that. I just wasn't into it in the moment. And
you're lost.
The more you can know that whatever someone is saying has nothing to do with you, which I remember at the beginning of my journey, like that made no sense to me. Like if someone is attacking me or judging me or whatever, like of course that's about me, right? And it took a while for me to fully comprehend that, you know, someone's judgments about you has to do with their own judgments, their past experiences, all those sorts of things. Just like your judgments about somebody else also have to do with your past experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And so the more that you can just be open to whatever outcome, if you're asking for help or if you're asking for sex or whatever it is, and just be okay with whatever outcome and know that whatever they respond with doesn't have anything negative to do with you, the better.
Right. Amen.
And along those lines, there's a beautiful image. If I remember, I'll drop it into the comments. I love it so much. There's this huge, it's a sculpture that someone created of these two adults that are kind of hollow, and they're sitting back to back because they're in a fight. And on the inside of those two adults are these two little children that are facing each other, and they're wanting to connect. And what that represents is when two adults are having a super heated argument, a knockdown, drag out fight, or whatever, they aren't acting as healthy adults in that situation. They are both being triggered, they're triggering each other, and what's happening is the little kid inside of them that's being wounded by what's being said or how people are being treated, whatever, those are who are rising to the surface and talking. When in reality, those kids just want to be loved and comforted and held and felt, feeling safe and all those things. So, this work has really shown me how to recognize triggers, which a lot, it lives in the body, right? So if someone raises their voice in my direction, often I'll get like a tightness in my chest. And if your body is talking to you, at least in this situation, like I know immediately that that's a trigger. And that took me a while to figure out and to learn and to know how to navigate. But now, like, there's been several instances in our relationship where you've said something or something has come up that could have triggered me and could have led to a fight or a disagreement. But because of the work I've done on myself, I know, like, where that fear or that pain or whatever is coming from, and that it had nothing to do with what's actually happening between us. There was a moment yesterday or the day before, we're both planning to audition for a play, which I'm really excited about. And one of the characters, we were kind of analyzing one of the characters that I want to audition for, and that we both agree that I would be a good fit for. And Tyler said that this character, like me, like you, I forget how you said it because that was key to this, is tied to the past, is what he said. And then he explained a little bit about that. And the way I interpreted what he said about being tied to the past was that I thought what he was saying is I tend to focus a lot on my past, pulling things from my 15-year relationship into what we're experiencing here and all of that. And so, like, and I didn't feel it, like, any negative energy about it. Like, because one thing about us is I really value his opinion, and I know that he wasn't coming from, even if that interpretation were correct, I knew he wasn't being malicious or judgy or anything about it. He was just being observational. But then 20 minutes later, I brought it up to really just out of curiosity. It wasn't to, like, clear the air or anything. I was just like, can you just say some more about what you meant by that? And what he meant was, by being tied to the past, he meant, like, preserving tradition and enjoying antiques and, like, stuff from the past versus me dwelling on my past. So I share all that as an example of, like, I could have been pissed off or felt hurt or judged by that comment. And two, like, that's the importance of clarifying with people, like, what do you mean by that? Can we have an open conversation about it and be curious about it without having that preconceived notion or judgment like you were talking about with the text messages of, like, I'm expecting this conversation to go bad, so it's going to go bad. And just being open and curious and present with each other, while also navigating any sort of, like, chest tightness or pain in your stomach or whatever's coming up in your body that might indicate you're having a trigger.
I think part of it too, the mindset going into that, and I'll speak from some past experience in a different type of relationship other than just the romantic duo that we have, is remembering that in any relationship that you're in, hopefully you're on the same team, right?
Yeah.
And you are working towards the same goal of a healthy, thriving relationship in any relationship that you choose to be in. And I remember sitting in a staff meeting at one point in time, and we were trying to make a plan for something. I couldn't even tell you what the something was, and everybody had differing opinions, and it became 4-on-4, right? It was just, or not 4-on-4, 1-on-1. There were 4 of us in the room, and at a certain point, I was like, whoa. Like, we are all on the same team.
Yeah.
Like, we're working towards the same goal. Like, I know that we all have strong opinions and we have views on what's going to make us profitable and stronger as a company. But, like, this is not it. You know, what's happening right now in this room, like, this is not it. Like, let's keep in mind that we're all working towards the same thing and we all have good ideas. Right, and we can acknowledge like, oh yeah, these are all really good ideas. So like that refocus that needs to happen. But like I kind of what you were talking about, like knowing when you're to the point where you can no longer be contributing to that relationship in the situation is so important. It's so important. My one of my best friends, she and I have been friends for like 19 years, and you know, we went through a really, really rough patch in college. And whenever we would fight, which was pretty regularly, she got really frustrated because whenever she would start to get like red-faced, angry, that is when I just shut down. That's when I'm like, nope, I can't hear anything anymore, and I need time away from the situation. And she's the opposite. She would be like, no, like literally pounding on the door. We need to talk about this now. You know, the whole like don't go to bed angry thing. Maybe for some people, I was not that person because I know when I can no longer contribute to a conversation in a productive way because I can only spit out and give. I can't take anything, right? And that's not conducive to a relationship, you know, and especially not one where the emotions are elevated. So just remembering that you're on the same team and you're striving for the same goal, I think is beneficial.
And knowing yourself, and so I also tend to shut down in really stressful arguments, which has been a long time since I've experienced that, but that tends to be my shock response whenever there's a lot thrown at me. That kind of happened for me during my jury duty experience when we were all deliberating on the trial. There were some really hot emotions in that room. People were crying, people were interrupting each other. Meanwhile, I was just like internalizing everything and not saying anything. So that's one piece, is when you're in a relationship with someone, know that people have different ways of reacting to different things. The other piece that I want to highlight from what you said is like the art of the pause. It took a while for me to learn how to get used to being okay with just pausing in a conversation, taking a breath, maybe walking away for a few minutes. Because for whatever reason, I believed that conflict needed to be addressed right away. Like you couldn't just leave the conversation even temporarily. And it was really uncomfortable for me, like when I felt like a response was expected of me immediately, to just pause, take a deep breath, because what that allows you to do is respond versus react. And what I mean by that is reacting is often coming from a split second, often coming from a triggered place where you're reacting based on the triggers, the stuff that's going on in your body, that little kid who wants to be heard, wants to be seen, versus responding when you can take a breath, think about what you want to say, like pause and actually reflect on the goal of the conversation, remembering that you're on the same team, that sort of thing.
I think the elevated or the accelerated grade above that is how do you show up for somebody in that situation whenever they are the people that are screaming at you. You know, because it's one thing to check yourself, it's another thing to whenever that is coming at you.
Come here, Joey. Joey has something to say.
I don't know if you can hear that through these microphones or not, but very loudly there was a cat that just went meow.
See?
Anyway, but whenever there is somebody in that place who you maybe don't feel like is being a partner in the relationship at that point in time, how you show up for them or what that communication looks like.
Yeah.
And from the recovery background that I have, there would be people that were brand new to that recovery program that would come in with a lot of feelings, as we all did whenever we first came in. A lot of times they were angry and they just wanted solutions on, how do I do this right now? How do I fix this person right now? And being the person to tell them, like, I don't have that for you. There isn't some magic wand that you can wave. Otherwise, none of us would be here if that were the case, right? But I was able to get to a place in that recovery program where compassion and just unconditional love for those people was pretty easy to come by, because I've been there and I know what it's like to be in that place. And I try to channel that type of thing whenever I'm dealing with somebody who isn't able to show up as emotionally available or open-minded in a relationship as I am in that situation. And that's not a holier than thou thing. That is just, you're in a different place right now than what I'm in, and that's okay. But yes, I have to protect myself, and there's self-preservation that has to happen. But for me personally, that's not really much of a thing anymore. Yeah. Like, I've been doing this long enough that I am, for the most part, mostly bulletproof to that type of stuff. You can call me every name in the book, and I'm not going to take that on for the most part. Like, you have to work really hard to offend me. So, and a question that I ask people often is, when they're talking about the things that people are saying to them, what I ask them is, if a random person on the street walked up to you tomorrow and said those things to you, would you take that on the same way that you're taking it on right now? Yeah. Realizing that when people are in those positions of being that angry or that upset or feeling that attacked or whatever, that they are not in their right mind at all. Like, that, they are currently not the person that you know and love. Right. And so you can't give credit to anything that's coming out of their mouth, and you might know that in whenever you're both in good places, but it's harder to remember whenever you're not. And I saw a TikTok the other day of a couple that were talking about how they had a conversation about their triggers and the way that they feel during an argument, whenever they weren't arguing, so that they could understand, like, this is what you are going through physically and emotionally in those moments, and this is how we need to respond, or this is how I'd like for you to show up for me in those moments. Because some people respond really well to, you're being a bitch right now. I know a lot of people who would be like, what? And so, that's a button to be pushed. They're in the recovery community they come from as well. One of the things that people would often say is, well, they were pushing my buttons, and the response to that would be, what are you doing with buttons? Yeah. Why do you have buttons? They're your buttons. Yeah, they're your buttons. Uninstall them. Figure that out. That's your job, right?
And that's not to say that other people don't have responsibility in their relationship. Like, of course. If they're intentionally being unkind or being an asshole, like, that is on them. But your feelings are your responsibility. Right. There was something else. There's so much, like, there's so many different paths this conversation could take. Yeah. It's hard to cover all of them. But I think if someone, especially someone I know, were to, like, attack me and, like, call me a bunch of names and whatever, I would be less bulletproof than you. That being said, I can recognize when someone is coming from a really triggered, wounded place. I'm going to just give the jury duty example again. Like, so just high level, I was on the jury for a murder trial back in January, and it was traumatic for all of us, myself included. And when it came time for us to deliberate on the decision, like that's when shit got very real. And emotions were just very hot in that moment. And there was one individual who wasn't agreeing with the rest of us, and she herself was like very audible, like very visibly in shock and that sort of thing. And it was the first time in a long time where I felt myself not acting from a fully healthy place. And I was trying to like navigate my emotions and thoughts while also being in a room with 11 other people who probably haven't done a lot of this work, if any. So it was just a lot. And so I had to keep breathing and coming back to myself. And I wasn't fully back into my body until I got home that night and got to like get it out of my system with Tyler and sit here and release all that. But yeah, that to me is an extreme example of what can happen in really heightened, stressful situations.
Yeah. I was just thinking about what that experience must be. I mean, it's one thing to hear you talking about it. It's another thing to like try to put myself in that situation of where you are literally locked into a room with other people going through the same traumatic experience and having the same, for lack of a better term, trauma, you know, kind of put upon you.
Traumatic.
Yeah. To have no outlet for that until after everything is said and done and you get to come home. And even then, you can't talk too much about it either. Nothing specifically.
Not till after it was done.
Yeah.
So it was a 4-day trial, and the first 3 days it was a lot, but I was able to navigate it fine. It was surreal at times, witnessing footage of the shooting happen and stuff like that. But the last day, where the jury finally got to talk amongst themselves, and you know, not only were we working with this decision, but everybody was all having their own individual experiences with it. Like it was a lot. So one other thing I wanted to touch on is, you know, I may not be in a place where I can receive or have a bulletproof vest with someone coming at me and attacking me, but I'm also in a place where I'm not, like, those relationships with people are not going to be a thing. Like, I might get that from a stranger from time to time, but the people I love and care about are not going to treat me that way. That being said, there are going to be instances where you're out in the public or whatever that you can't control how other people act towards you. But, you know, part of this is also setting boundaries and not allowing that sort of behavior, not tolerating that sort of behavior toward you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why boundary setting is so important. You know, boundaries are for ourselves. We set boundaries for ourselves, not for other people. Because if you are setting boundaries thinking, I'm going to do this so that somebody else will change their behavior or do something differently, like that isn't boundary setting, that's manipulation. Right. Because anytime you do anything with the outcome to change somebody's opinion, mind, actions, whatever, that's manipulation. Yeah. So, and that's not always easy. You know, boundary setting can be hard, but you know, for me, I always have to say to myself, Tyler, if you set this boundary, are you actually able to keep this boundary? Mm-hmm. And sometimes having a plan for what that's supposed to look like. So, and that can be so hard, especially with people that you care about the most. You know, any sort of relationship work, in my opinion, is always hardest with the people that you have known the longest. Because that's like the habits and the groove that relationship moves in is so well worn that to change that, it gets really, really tough. Really, really tough. Doesn't mean it's not necessary. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it's hard. You know, I had a lot of those types of conversations with people in my recovery community, especially early on. And what I was told is, you know, kind of like to your point of all of you finally getting to speak about the murder trial in the jury room, the jury deliberation is, you know, I was told, Tyler, whoever has the most tools has the most responsibility. And I hated that for a long time. because what it came down to for me is, a lot of times I was the only person who, as far as I know, was actively doing any sort of work on my relationships and myself, actively. And so I was the one who was the advocate for change, because I was the one who was actively changing and doing things differently in those relationships, and it made people really, really uncomfortable. And so I I was on the receiving end of a lot of like, "Wah, what's going on?" and discomfort from them. And of course, I was uncomfortable as well. But I had to remind myself that the changes that I was making was fighting for the health and the longevity of those relationships. I was doing work so that relationship was going to last longer, right? Because there were some relationships that I was like, I know that at the end of this, I'm going to be done with this relationship. Like, this is too hard. It's too heavy. There's too much resentment and stuff tied up in this. And, one of those relationships, I knew going into work on that relationship, that I was like, at the end, I'm going to have to leave this. Yeah. I know that. And I did the work anyway, knowing that might be the outcome. And that isn't what happened. Luckily that person was also in, working on themselves as well. And so we got to talk about it. Yeah. The years and years and years of conflict that we had became just, we have to talk about things and talk about ourselves and talk about what we wanted our relationship to be. And that's what it gets to be today. It doesn't look the same that it did so many years ago, but that's okay. I often call that the best and worst relationship I've ever had in my life, because it was really, really, really hard. But because of how low it was, I saw, I was able to, oh God, a phoenix metaphor. It was able to rise from the ashes and be reborn. So dramatic. But that's really how it felt. It is something that I look back and think about, that relationship started so high in my life and was so important, and then because of the weight that I put on it, and the amount of power that had in my life, it was everything to me. This relationship was the most important thing. And whenever you have a relationship on a pedestal like that, it plummeted. And whenever it fell so far, I lost myself. I was like, I don't know what I am without this relationship. And so if I have to leave that, what does it look like, right? And so we got to rebuild that into something else today that it's just fantastic. It's a testament to the work that I get to do, on a daily basis, which has nothing to do with whoever has the most power has the most responsibilities. I don't know how I got to that point from that, but and so my point is, I get to be the person to fight for those relationships today. Sometimes I have to ask myself, is this relationship worth this work? Because I still have people in my life that, the person I'm thinking of, every time I see their name come across my phone, whenever they're calling me, I have to ask myself, do I have the wherewithal, the ability, the energy to engage with this person? And a lot of times that answer is no, because this is a person that I refer to as an energy vampire, where that relationship, there's not a lot of give and take. It's mostly me giving and them just taking and taking and taking. Nothing physically, but just my energy and my positivity, and just feel like sometimes they're sucking the life out of me. And so I have to ration the time that I engage with them. And that's my responsibility. That's something that I have to do, because, I've seen other people in my life who don't do that, who think that, I have to answer when this person calls for various reasons, and it's the same person. And, they, for the most part, and in person, I have a positive relationship with this person, because they're very different over the phone than they are in person. But, in order for me to keep that relationship positive, I have to not answer the phone 90% of the time that they call. And I have to check in with myself and say, am I able to have this conversation right now? And there have been some situations in my life where the work isn't worth it anymore, right? Or
Yeah.
I have realized that this is not a relationship that is going to be positive in my life, right? Um, like that's the job I left. You know, is there was too much of my energy going into that, and not enough coming back to me. That was a completely unbalanced relationship that I needed to leave, and there was a lot of conflict in that throughout the process, and it just didn't fit for my life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't like the idea of calling it a breakup, or I don't even know all the other cliches that people say. I quit. It just, I left that company because it didn't fit with my life anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I wish them well. It wasn't like I gave a 2 weeks notice and then I was gone. I gave an open-ended notice because the people that worked there and that business as a whole was really important to me. And I wanted to make sure that they were in a positive place before I left. Because at the end of the day, I had to live with my decisions, right? So making the choice to leave that company, I wanted to make sure I left on a positive note.
Yeah.
That was important to me.
The most loving choice for you is the most loving choice for everyone around you. I think I've used that phrase like 3 or 4 times in my book. So it was one that my therapist drilled at me, and it was another one that I didn't fully understand or accept when I first started hearing it. But, you know, in order to keep relationships positive, that requires setting boundaries, and sometimes it can go to the extreme of cutting that person out of your life. I've had experience with that. Or, on a lesser extent, it can look like spending less time with them, mm-hmm. or, you know, shortening conversations or not answering the phone or whatever. And we've talked, I think we talked about this a little bit last week, is like when you have a history or a relationship that's been going on for a long time and you start to make changes in that relationship, oftentimes the response you get is like, what is happening? I don't like this, which can look like various things for different people.
Yeah.
But it's about checking in with yourself and seeing like, what is the most loving choice for me in this situation, and then acting on it instead of the old pattern of continuing to give your energy away, like feeling that sense of obligation. Well, this person needs me, so I have to respond to that. Because, yeah, when you have a need to be needed, it can be hard to let go of, like, it can be hard to not respond to someone's request for help. But just know that people are very resourceful, and they will either figure things out for themselves or they will find somebody else to ask for help whenever you're not available.
It's not your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's their job.
And if there is the expectation that you will help them, then that just further exacerbates the unhealthiness of that relationship.
I believe that's called codependency.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't... Mm-mm. I had so many relationships like that. So many, all the time. But also, like, people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
You know, I learned a lot of that stuff from a young age of, like, this is what love is. This is what you do if you love someone. And you still see that played out all the time in pop culture and just everything. Some of the things that come to mind is, like the Jerry Maguire, like, you complete me thing, or the Jordan Sparks, and I think it's Chris Brown duet called No Air. Like, I'm trying to think about how the chorus goes, but basically, like, without you, I can't live. Oh gosh, yeah. Like, why? So that person dies, and then what happens? You know, or on the flip side of that, if you feel needed, if you have the need to be needed by other people, like, why aren't you complete by yourself? You know. Yeah, and again, that's not about judgment. That's just like, I used to be that person.
Me
Like,
too.
I get that. I know what that's like, and that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. But also, like, most of the people who who I needed to be needed by, whenever they would get into other relationships, oftentimes I would be left by the wayside, because not that I was a meal ticket, but when those needs start to get met by other people, I felt like, what's wrong with me? You know, but like, that's my job. That's what I'm here for,
Yeah.
right? And that's like, to be dependent on somebody else for all of that stuff, like, it's not healthy, frankly, you know. It's not, like I said, it's not sustainable.
And to be clear, that's very different from having a generous, kind, loving nature where you enjoy helping people, because obviously that's my whole career, is helping people. But when you do it at the extent of, at the risk of, at the sacrifice of your own happiness, your own well-being, your own energy, and it's repetitive and that's a consistent pattern for you, that's when it's unhealthy.
Or if you're doing it with expectations, again, that's manipulation.
Yeah, right. Helping someone with the expectation that they'll help you in return at some point, or helping someone with the expectation that they will love and adore and appreciate you, to like fill that need for external validation.
Which I think a lot of conflict as well revolves around expectations.
Yeah. Which leads to disappointment.
Right.
And that, I can't remember if I said this, so I actually wrote a post on this earlier today too, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm just going to say that it bears repeating. That whole notion that I said earlier about communicating your needs and desires, when you don't communicate those and you expect someone to read your mind, that breeds resentment towards the other person. And that's not their fault. So it's so important to just communicate and ask for what you want. And then they get to respond. So that's the thing about communication and boundaries, is like, you can ask for what you want and they can say yes or no. And that goes the other way too. Like, remembering that no is a complete answer, and that goes for you as both the respondent and the receiver of that message. Yeah. Again, there's so many paths that this conversation can take.
Yeah.
I feel like we've covered enough for today. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
I don't think so. Can't you read my mind?
If after watching this, go ahead.
Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. I realized that I was apologizing to them for something I'm about to say. I realized as I was drinking my coffee that I was really close to this microphone. So if you had like full on unexpected ASMR from the coffee slurping,
You're welcome.
either you're welcome or I'm sorry. Either way.
If you had any comments on the stuff that we've shared, just drop any questions. Just drop them, and certainly comments too, but drop any questions into the chat, and we'll be happy to address those. So thanks for being with us today.
Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Bye.